Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
The room was filled with laughter, the scent of vanilla cupcakes and fresh flowers hanging in the air, and the gentle hum of conversation creating the perfect backdrop to what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. My baby shower had been meticulously planned, pastel decorations, a beautifully arranged table of tiny sandwiches and sweets, and a group of friends and family gathered to celebrate the upcoming arrival of my first child. I should have been enjoying every moment, basking in the warmth of well wishes and the excitement of becoming a mother, but the second Margaret arrived, my stomach twisted into knots. My mother-in-law had a way of sucking the joy out of any occasion, and today was no exception. She walked in with her usual air of self-importance, scanning the room like she owned the place, her eyes settling on me with a knowing smirk. Margaret had never liked me, not truly. She tolerated me because her son, Jake, adored me, but I always felt like she was waiting for the moment I would slip up, the moment I would prove to her that I wasn't worthy of her precious firstborn. At first, I thought she just had a hard time letting go, but as the years passed, I realized it was something much darker than that. She didn't want to let go. She wanted control, complete and total control, over her son, over our marriage, and now, apparently, over our child. I was standing near the gift table, thanking one of Jake's cousins for a beautifully wrapped set of baby blankets, when Margaret appeared beside me so silently that I nearly jumped. Her hand, cold and bony, landed on my arm, her nails pressing just a little too hard against my skin as she leaned in close. "We'll be taking the first grandchild to raise," she whispered, her voice calm, confident, as if it were a statement of fact rather than an outrageous declaration. "You're too career-obsessed, and we both know that baby will need proper guidance." My breath caught in my throat, my heartbeat pounding so loudly in my ears that I barely registered the next words she said. "We." She wasn't just talking about herself, she meant her and her husband, Jake's father, a man so passive in their marriage that he would probably go along with whatever scheme she cooked up just to keep the peace. I turned my head slowly, blinking at her, searching for some trace of humor, some indication that this was some twisted joke, but her expression remained perfectly composed. A slight, smug smile played on her lips, as if she had already won, as if this had already been decided, and I was just now being informed. Before I could react, before I could even process the sheer audacity of what she had just said, Jake's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "That's cute," he said, his tone light but laced with something firm, something immovable. "Especially since we just moved across the country." Margaret's entire face changed in an instant. The smirk disappeared, her lips parting slightly, her carefully applied lipstick no longer masking the way her jaw tensed. Her eyes widened just enough for me to see the cracks in her confidence, the shock hitting her like a slap across the face. "You, what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but I could hear the panic creeping in beneath the surface. Jake took a sip of his drink, completely unfazed, his free hand settling protectively on my lower back. "Yeah, we didn't really announce it yet, but everything's finalized. We're moving next week, actually. New job opportunity, new house, fresh start. Oh, and it's very far away." The color drained from Margaret's face. I could practically see the gears turning in her mind, the way she was scrambling to regain control, to come up with some way to spin this in her favor. This wasn't how things were supposed to go in her mind. She had probably been envisioning herself waltzing into our home whenever she pleased, taking over like she always did, inserting herself into every aspect of our parenting. Now, suddenly, we were slipping through her fingers, disappearing before she even had a chance to sink her claws in. For a moment, she said nothing, just staring at Jake like she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Then, slowly, her eyes flickered back to me, her expression shifting, her lips pressing into a thin, dangerous line. The warmth, the forced pleasantries, all of it was gone. "I see," she finally said, her voice measured, controlled, but there was something behind it, something dark, something that sent a shiver down my spine. "That's quite the surprise. I didn't miss the way her fingers curled into her palm, the way her nails dug into her own skin. I could practically feel the resentment radiating off her in waves, her anger barely concealed beneath the surface. Jake squeezed my waist gently, as if to reassure me, as if to remind me that we were in this together, that no matter what happened next, we had each other. Margaret, however, was far from finished. She took a deep breath, forcing a tight smile back onto her face, and tilted her head slightly. "Well, I suppose that means I'll just have to visit as often as possible," she said, her tone sweet, but there was an edge to it, a promise wrapped in false politeness. I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to, because I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that this was far from over. As she turned and walked away, pretending to mingle with the other guests as if nothing had happened, I felt the weight of what had just transpired settle in my chest. Margaret wasn't giving up. No, this was just the beginning. And I had a sinking feeling that whatever she did next would be much, much worse. The baby shower had ended, the decorations were taken down, the leftover cake sat in the fridge, and the thank you notes were half written on the kitchen counter, but the lingering tension from Margaret's words had settled into my bones like a poison I couldn't shake. Jake, ever the optimist, brushed it off as another one of his mother's dramatic outbursts, an empty threat from a woman who had spent her entire life getting her way through manipulation and guilt. He kissed my forehead, told me not to worry, and went about his day as if nothing had happened, but I knew better than to think Margaret would just accept our decision and move on. The way her expression had changed when she realized we were leaving, the way she had composed herself so quickly, the eerie sweetness in her voice when she promised to visit as often as possible, it all pointed to one terrifying certainty. She wasn't done. 2 days later, the first message arrived, a simple text from Margaret to Jake, one that he showed me with an amused shake of his head, clearly believing that she was already backpedaling from her absurd statement at the shower. "Oh, Jake, I hope you know I was just teasing Emma the other day. Of course, I would never try to take your child away from you too. I only meant that I wanted to be involved as much as possible, but I realize now how that might have come across. Tell Emma I'm so sorry if I scared her. It was all in good fun." I stared at the message for a long time, rereading each carefully chosen word, feeling the same slow burn of rage building in my chest, the same nauseating mix of anger and disbelief that had been my constant companion ever since she'd whispered those chilling words at my baby shower. She wasn't apologizing because she regretted what she had said. She was apologizing because she had been caught. And worse, she was planting a seed, twisting the narrative in a way that made it seem like I was the unreasonable one, like I was the one who had misunderstood, like I was the dramatic, emotional, overreacting pregnant woman who had blown a simple joke out of proportion. Jake, bless his heart, really wanted to believe that his mother meant what she said, that she was capable of backing down, of seeing reason, of respecting our decisions. He squeezed my hand and said, "See? I told you she wouldn't actually try anything. She just gets carried away sometimes, but she's not dangerous, Emma. She just doesn't know when to shut up." I forced a smile, nodded, and pretended to believe him, but deep down, I knew Margaret wasn't just going to let this go. And I was right. By the end of the week, the first whispers started making their way back to me through family members, concerned aunts, and distant cousins reaching out with hesitant, carefully worded questions that all pointed to the same horrifying revelation. Margaret had begun spreading rumors. I was too busy to be a mother. I had always been so focused on my career, so obsessed with climbing the corporate ladder, so unwilling to slow down and embrace the role of motherhood that it was only natural for her, as the devoted and experienced matriarch of the family, to step in and ensure that her first grandchild would be properly cared for. It wasn't an attack, of course, just a concern, just a loving grandmother trying to offer support in case I realized, too late, that I wasn't cut out for motherhood. I nearly smashed my phone against the kitchen counter when I received the 10th message of the day, yet another relative telling me, with gentle sympathy, that they'd heard, through the grapevine, that I had already decided to go back to work immediately after giving birth, that Margaret was only stepping in to help, that they hoped I wouldn't be offended by her offer. The lies were so insidious, so calculated, so perfectly designed to make me seem like an uncaring, selfish mother before I had even given birth. And then, as if that wasn't enough, Margaret took it one step further. Jake received a text the next morning with a phone number attached, a simple message accompanying it. "I know you and Emma will make the best decision for the baby, but I wanted to pass this along just in case you ever need some legal guidance. Grandparents have rights too, you know. It's always good to be informed." I stared at the text for a full minute before the meaning of it truly sank in. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was a threat. She was warning us, in the most passive-aggressive way possible, that if we didn't let her have access to our child, she was prepared to take legal action. Jake's face darkened as he read the message, his easygoing nature vanishing in an instant, his fingers tightening around his phone so hard that I thought he might snap it in half. "She wouldn't actually do this," he said, but this time, his voice lacked the confidence it had held before. This time, he wasn't so sure. I took a deep breath, my hands settling protectively over my stomach, feeling the weight of my unborn child, the undeniable reality that I was about to bring a baby into a world where my own mother-in-law saw him as something to be claimed rather than loved. But I wasn't scared. No, I was something else entirely. I was ready. Margaret thought she could manipulate me, twist the story, turn Jake against me, convince the world that I was an unfit mother who needed help, but she had underestimated the one thing that would make all the difference. I wasn't just a career woman. I wasn't just someone who worked long hours and knew how to navigate corporate politics. I was someone who knew how to fight back. And I was about to show Margaret exactly what happened when she tried to take something that didn't belong to her. I had spent years letting her walk all over me, letting her make snide remarks, letting her undermine me in every way imaginable, but this was different. This was war. The next day, I started making calls, reaching out to a lawyer of my own, preparing a counterplan, setting the pieces in motion before she could even see what was coming. Margaret thought she was untouchable, that she could get away with anything, that no one would ever challenge her because they were too afraid of what she might do next. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. And by the time I was finished, Margaret would wish she had never started this fight in the first place. The silence in the house was heavy, thick with the weight of everything that had been said and left unsaid in the days following Margaret's not-so-subtle threats, her manipulative messages, and her calculated campaign to paint me as an unfit mother before I had even given birth. I could see it in Jake's eyes every time he looked at his phone, the growing exhaustion, the war within him as he tried to reconcile the mother he had known all his life with the woman who had just suggested, however carefully worded, that she might have legal grounds to interfere in how we raised our own child. For all his love and loyalty to me, there was still that deep-rooted need to believe that she wasn't as bad as she seemed, that there was some way to fix this, some way to make her understand that this wasn't her decision to make. I, however, had no such illusions. Margaret wasn't backing down, and I knew that any moment of silence from her end wasn't a sign of surrender. It was a sign that she was regrouping, strategizing, planning her next move with the same ruthless precision she had used to control every aspect of Jake's life for years. And sure enough, when she resurfaced, she came back playing a role she had perfected over a lifetime, the victim. Jake received the call late at night, just as we were settling into bed, my back aching from a long day, my body heavy with the exhaustion that came with being nearly 8 months pregnant and constantly on edge. The second his phone lit up with her name, I felt my stomach tighten, my pulse quicken, and when he hesitated before answering, I knew he was just as tired of this as I was. "Jake, honey," her voice came through the speaker the moment he picked up, thick with emotion, the kind that was designed to tug at heartstrings and trigger guilt before he even had a chance to react. I don't even know what to say anymore. I feel like my own son is turning against me, and I don't even understand what I did to deserve this. I could hear it, the careful breaks in her voice, the way she sniffled just loud enough for him to notice, the way she made sure to sound devastated without actually apologizing for anything she had done. "I love Emma," she continued, her words slow, deliberate, each one meant to plant a seed of doubt, but she's shutting me out, and I don't know why. I was only trying to help, to offer my support, but she's treating me like some kind of enemy. I've never been anything but good to her, Jake, and now she's acting like I'm a monster. Jake sighed heavily, rubbing his temple, already caught in the tangled web she had spun around him since childhood, the same web that made it nearly impossible for him to see her manipulation for what it truly was. "Mom, no one is shutting you out," he said, his voice steady but tired. "But you crossed a line when you started talking about taking over parenting decisions before the baby is even here." "I never meant it like that," she cried, her voice cracking just enough to make him flinch. "I was joking. I was excited. You have no idea how much this hurts me, Jake. My own son, treating me like I'm some kind of threat? What kind of person do you think I am?" I sat in bed, watching him, watching the way his grip tightened around the phone, watching the way his shoulders tensed as he listened to her sobs, knowing exactly what was happening even if he didn't fully see it yet. She was pulling him back in, making herself the victim, painting me as the problem, hoping that if she cried hard enough, if she played the wounded mother just right, he would second-guess everything, would soften, would start to wonder if maybe, just maybe, I was the one overreacting. I had seen it before, felt the weight of it in every backhanded comment, in every guilt-tripping phone call, in every time Jake came back from a conversation with her looking torn between standing by my side and trying to keep the peace. But this time, I was ready. I reached into my nightstand, pulling out my phone, scrolling until I found the recording I had made just 2 days ago, when Margaret had called her sister and actually said, in no uncertain terms, that she believed she needed to step in because I was too wrapped up in her career to be a proper mother. She had actually said the words, plain as day, that it was her responsibility to step up before the baby became another neglected child of a modern working woman. I pressed play. Jake's eyes flickered to me, confused at first, but then the words filled the air between us, Margaret's voice so unmistakably clear, so undeniably damning, that his entire expression changed before my eyes. I saw it in real time, the way the last threads of doubt snapped, the way the blinders fell away, the way realization finally hit him with the full force of the truth. Margaret wasn't confused. She wasn't misunderstood. She wasn't an overexcited grandmother who had made an offhand comment in the heat of the moment. She was trying to take our child. He exhaled sharply, jaw tightening, his hand running through his hair as he listened to his mother say, in her own words, that she was already making plans, already setting things in motion, already deciding what her grandchild's life would look like, without us in it. When the recording ended, there was a long silence, one where I held my breath and watched as Jake finally saw her for what she was. He looked down at his phone, at the still-lit screen showing his mother's name, her voice still faintly audible as she rambled on about how she only wanted to help, and then, without another word, he hung up. "I'm done," he said, his voice firm, his hands steady, no hesitation left in his eyes. "If she keeps pushing, we're cutting her off completely." I nodded, feeling the first real wave of relief since this nightmare had started, but deep down, I knew Margaret wasn't going to take this loss quietly. And sure enough, less than 24 hours later, a post appeared on Facebook, written in her unmistakably dramatic style, announcing to the world that she was so excited to welcome her first grandchild, that she couldn't wait to raise them right, that she was honored to step into such an important role in this child's life. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting with fury, my hands shaking as I realized exactly what she was doing. She wasn't backing down. She was doubling down. And I wasn't about to let her win. The moment I saw Margaret's post, my entire body tensed, a cold wave of fury washing over me so strong that I could feel it settle deep in my bones. There it was, written in her sickeningly sweet, performative tone, a carefully crafted declaration meant to frame herself as the loving, self-sacrificing grandmother stepping up where she was so clearly needed. The words stared back at me from my phone screen, taunting, manipulative, and dripping with the kind of passive-aggressive control she had always wielded like a weapon. I'm beyond thrilled to welcome my precious first grandchild into the world very soon. Being a grandmother is such a blessing, and I know it's my duty to step in and provide the guidance and care this little one will need. I can't wait to raise them with love, patience, and wisdom. This child will be so lucky to have a strong maternal figure looking out for them. My breath came slow and measured, my fingers gripping my phone so tightly I thought the screen might crack beneath the pressure, my vision narrowing to that one horrifying line, "I can't wait to raise them." There was no mention of me, no acknowledgement that I was the mother, no indication that she saw herself as anything other than the rightful authority in my baby's life. It wasn't excitement. It was ownership. It was possession. It was a warning. For a brief moment, I considered ignoring it, considered taking the high road, considered brushing it off as yet another pathetic attempt at controlling a situation that was already slipping through her fingers. But then, the comments started rolling in, family members and distant friends congratulating her, telling her how wonderful she was, how lucky the baby would be, how it was so good that she was stepping up to help when some mothers just couldn't handle the responsibility. And that was when I knew I wasn't just going to cut her off. I was going to burn this to the ground. I cracked my knuckles, took a deep breath, and with a slow, deliberate calm, I typed my response, making sure every word would cut exactly where it needed to. Raise my child? That's news to me. By the way, we live 3,000 miles away now. But thanks for the laugh. The moment I hit send, the effect was instantaneous. Within minutes, people began reacting, some laughing at the sheer bluntness of my response, others questioning what was really going on, and a few brave souls even calling out Margaret directly, asking what she meant by taking over a parental role that was never hers to begin with. The carefully constructed illusion she had built, the perfect image of the devoted grandmother ready to step in for her supposedly unprepared daughter-in-law, shattered under the weight of public scrutiny. Margaret must have seen my comment almost immediately, because within moments, her post was edited, then deleted entirely, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Screenshots had already been taken, conversations had already started, and family members were now messaging both me and Jake, asking what was really going on and why his mother thought she had any authority over our child's upbringing. Jake, to his credit, stood firmly by my side, his patience for his mother's antics completely gone now that he had finally seen her for what she was. He made it clear to anyone who asked, Margaret had crossed a line, she was out of control, and no, she would not be involved in raising our baby in any capacity. When a few relatives tried to mediate, suggesting we talk it out for the sake of family harmony, Jake shut it down immediately, telling them in no uncertain terms that his mother had been manipulating the situation for months, spreading lies, and that we were done playing her games. But Margaret, being Margaret, wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. 2 days after her public humiliation, after her failed attempt at controlling the narrative, after watching everything slip through her grasp, she made her next move. She showed up. I was in the kitchen, sipping a cup of tea, trying to enjoy a rare moment of calm before the baby arrived, when the doorbell rang. At first, I assumed it was a package delivery, maybe one of the last-minute baby supplies I had ordered, but when I checked the security camera feed, my stomach dropped. There, standing on my front porch, looking composed but seething beneath the surface, was Margaret. I set my tea down slowly, taking a deep breath, my heart pounding hard against my ribs as I watched her shift from foot to foot, adjusting the purse on her shoulder, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes burning with something far more dangerous. She had lost the battle online. Now, she was bringing the war to my doorstep. I stood in the kitchen watching the security camera feed, my breath slow and measured, my hands gripping the edge of the counter as Margaret stood on my front porch, waiting for someone to let her in, her posture stiff and impatient. She had come uninvited, of course, because she never truly believed rules applied to her, never once considered that there would be a door she wasn't allowed to walk through, a space where she wasn't welcome, a family she couldn't control. The very idea that I would refuse to see her, that I would keep her away from her grandchild, Must have been so unthinkable to her that she had convinced herself I would eventually cave, that I would have no choice but to let her back in. She rang the doorbell again, this time holding it down just a little longer, making it clear that she wouldn't be ignored, that she wouldn't leave until I acknowledged her, that she was going to stand there until I opened the door and gave her whatever audience she had come here demanding. My stomach twisted with the familiar disgust that always accompanied her presence, that deep, unsettled feeling that told me nothing good would come from engaging, that this was a woman who thrived on conflict, who fed on manipulation, who had spent years sharpening her words into weapons that could cut even the strongest resolve into pieces. Jake came down the stairs, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, his expression hardening the second he saw my face, the second he realized exactly why I was standing so still, my arms crossed tightly over my chest as if bracing for impact. He didn't even need to look at the screen to know. He could feel it in the air, the thick, suffocating presence of his mother's chaos settling into our home like a storm cloud waiting to break. "Don't open it," he said firmly, his voice low but unshaken, his hand settling on my lower back in a way that was meant to ground me, to remind me that we were a team in this, that I wasn't standing alone against her. As if I would, I muttered, shaking my head, pressing my lips into a thin, hard line as she knocked again, louder this time, the sharp sound reverberating through the house like an alarm. Then, just as I had expected, the mask of civility began to slip. "Jake," she called through the door, her voice laced with feigned concern, as if this were just some innocent visit rather than a desperate attempt to force her way back into our lives. "I know you're in there. I just want to talk. This has all gotten so out of hand, and I know you don't really want things to be like this. I'm your mother. You wouldn't really cut me out of your child's life, would you?" Jake tensed beside me, his jaw tightening as he exhaled sharply through his nose, the final threads of patience snapping as she continued, her words taking on that familiar, manipulative lilt, the one that had worked on him so many times before. But not anymore. Not after everything she had done. "I know Emma is making this worse than it needs to be," she continued, her voice growing sharper, edged with accusation, no longer bothering to pretend that she wasn't shifting the blame entirely onto me. "I know she's been feeding you lies, turning you against me, making you think I would actually try to take the baby from you. But I forgive her, Jake, because I know she's hormonal and overwhelmed and probably not thinking clearly right now." I felt my fists clench, my nails digging into my palms, my entire body stiffening at the sheer audacity of it all, the blatant gaslighting, the carefully crafted attempt to drive a wedge between us, the disgusting way she dismissed my very real anger as hormonal nonsense, as if I were just some hysterical, unreasonable woman who couldn't see the truth. Jake reached for his phone, his face cold and unreadable as he scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hovering over the call button before looking at me with silent confirmation, a question in his eyes that I already knew the answer to. I nodded. "Do it." He hit the button. The second she heard the automated voice from the non-emergency police line, Margaret's demeanor changed instantly, her voice rising in panicked disbelief, her fists banging against the door now. Her control slipping completely as she realized what was happening. "Are you serious, Jake?" she screeched, her composure crumbling, the careful act of the misunderstood, loving mother vanishing in an instant. "You're calling the cops on your own mother? After everything I've done for you? After all the sacrifices I've made? You're really going to let her turn you against me like this?" Jake didn't answer, his expression blank as he calmly gave our address, explaining the situation in a level, unshaken voice, as if this were just another mundane task, as if this were nothing more than an inconvenience that needed to be handled. By the time the officer arrived, Margaret was still ranting, still trying to paint herself as the victim, still acting as if we were the ones being unreasonable for not allowing her to manipulate us into submission. But none of it mattered anymore. The restraining order was filed the next morning. Margaret was legally barred from contacting us, from coming near our home, from attempting any further interference. The final, pathetic attempts she made, calling extended family, posting vague, Pitiful messages online about how cruel it was to be alienated from her grandchild were ignored, dismissed, and forgotten. When our baby was finally born, the birth was peaceful, beautiful, everything it should have been, and Margaret was nowhere to be found. A year later, a letter arrived in the mail, her handwriting scrawled across the envelope in that desperate, familiar way, as if she believed that one last plea, one last carefully chosen set of words, could somehow erase everything, could somehow pull us back into her orbit. I didn't even open it. I walked straight to the trash, let it slip from my fingers, and watched it disappear into the pile of things that no longer had any power over me. She lost, and I never looked back.